Okay, thank you, Monica. Yes, I think that one hears that quite often. Into the production of a typical book, if we look at, let's say, a novel, which is a fairly simple book to publish, relatively speaking, one would have costs possibly for an editor. Very often authors are in need of further language refinement, etc. So you would need an editor, for example. You would need the book to be typeset, so the typesetter would get something. There might be a designer who would like to have a lovely cover for your book, so that's a further cost, which could sometimes then, as you explained, be shared with the author. There has to be printing done, so cost of paper, cost of printing, cost of delivery, warehousing. Publishers have to pay space in warehouses. There's cost of marketing, the logistics of getting the books to booksellers or whoever delivers the book. So that would be part of what then seems to be the rest of the 90%. So yes, it is true that the publisher would get the 90%, but of the 90%, perhaps 5% would be revenue into the pocket of the publisher itself. Yes, so I think that would be typically the kinds of costs that would be involved. If it's a school textbook, you would have further costs. It's hugely expensive to submit books to the Department of Basic Education. So especially newly or small publishers, newly established or small publishers sometimes find it extremely difficult to get into the market because of these high costs that I've highlighted. If you are a self-published author, of course, all those costs will have to be covered by yourself. I think that covers it, Monica, but if you can think of anything else I need to explain, please comment. Sorry, Monica, I didn't mention, of course, the publishing staff needs to be paid from the income of that. Yeah. You know, the income.
Electricity bills need to be
paid.
Yes,
the income from and tax, you have to pay tax as well as a publishing company. So in fact, there's quite a lot of expenses involved in publishing. Thank you.
You know, when I was working for a publishing company, we determining the cost of the book, we often used to find out when we've done all our calculations that if the amount received, the amount and the percentage received by the publisher at the end of all these calculations, and including the royalty paid to the author, if it was more or less on the level of what the author received, we were doing well with that book. So it's not 90% that the publisher can take. Nicole, did we mention the booksellers take a discount of between 30 and 40%, sometimes up to 50%? Did we mention the booksellers?
No, I didn't include that.
Yeah, well, there's the booksellers too. You know that the booksellers take sometimes up to 50% of the cost of the price of the book. So we used to find out that if we could say we had done as well as the author, we were doing very well. It's not 90% that the publisher can take for themselves. In our case, the publishing company I've just been spoken about, it was something like 6 or 7%, and it was less than the royalties that the author received. We are running out of time, which is a great pity. And there was very much more I wanted to say, and there were many more questions that I wanted to receive. So I think we're going to have another go at this, but there's something I want to talk about quickly before we end. And that is the question raised by Eleanor Sisulu. And that question is about, do the rights come back to the author at the end when the contract comes to an end? And this is a very important point. The APAC agreement insists that the author must be informed when the book goes out of print and is no longer in commerce, as the expression goes, and is not going to reprint it, and the publisher no longer has any use for it as an object that they are going to sell. What happens next? Well, at that point, the contract can... Okay. At that point, the contract can come to an end, but a contract needs to be ended. It doesn't just end by itself. And the way it should be ended, and the way that APAC recommends that it be ended, is that the publisher informs the author that the book is no longer in commerce, it's out of print, it's not going to be reprinted. The author then writes to the publisher and says, and asks for the rights to be reverted to the author. And only after the publisher has confirmed in writing that the author can have the rights back does that happen. This also applies to assignment of copyrights, because assignment is, in a sense, a right granted to the publisher. So there is a process attached to the reversion of rights. They don't just revert because the book is no longer in circulation, is no longer in print, is no longer going to be reprinted. There's something else that I want to say. Publishers, unfortunately, often don't inform the author when the book is out of print. And authors can be reluctant to ask for their rights back because the publisher can be alerted by that request to the fact that there's still a market for the book, and put it back into print, and yet not do anything to market it again and to sell a large number of copies again. But that is the only way that the author can get their rights back if they have not gone through the process of being informed. The book is out of print, we're not going to do anything about it again. The publisher asks for the rights back, the publisher grants the rights to the author. I would have said more about this if there had been time. And there's 7 questions. I'd like to speak to all of them. Here's one the previous speaker mentioned, 50 years, a period of copyright. Does that mean that the works can be reprinted thereafter? Can your work be left to you? Copyright in a book, in the content of a book, expires 50 years in South Africa, 50 years after the end of the year in which the author dies. But when an author dies, before the 50 years have taken place, of course, copyright is inherited by the author's heirs. It's the author's property, and like all property, it passes to the heirs. So in answer to your question, does that mean that works can be reprinted thereafter? Can the work be, I've answered, yes, the work can be left to the heirs. Can the works be reprinted thereafter? Yes. When copyright has expired, somebody, a publisher can print that work without paying fees, copyright fees, royalties rather, to the author. Let's take Shakespeare's works as obvious example, one of many thousands. You can publish your own version of Macbeth, because copyright in Macbeth has expired quite long ago. But one thing to say, I must mention, there's another copyright in a published book, and that is the copyright in the published edition. And that belongs to the publisher. The actual book, the way that the words are laid out on the page, the design, the cover, and so on, that is all copyright of the publisher. So what you can't, although you can publish Macbeth, you can't take the Penguin version of Macbeth and reproduce it as your version of Macbeth. I'm sorry that we've run out of time. I wanted to answer more questions. I think we're going to have another workshop like this, and we can carry on from this point. I really hope it's been useful for you. I'd like to thank you for registering. I'd like to thank Winston Mohapi and Nicole Fasten for coming along and answer questions. If they'd been here for longer, they would have had more questions put to them and been able to say a lot more. Next time we'll go on for longer. And I thank you again, and goodbye.